Good evening. Two young boys aged just 12 and 15 have been murdered in cold blood by a gang of young thugs.
Late on a Saturday evening in Cobblebank, a fast-growing suburb on Melbourne's western fringe, two boys were walking home just like any other weekend, talking about basketball, maybe plans for next week. But on the 6th of September 2025, that ordinary walk turned into something no parent ever wants to imagine. 15-year-old Dao Akweng and 12-year-old Chol Achik were ambushed by a group of masked youths armed with machetes and long blades. Both boys were found with fatal injuries so deep that even emergency services could not save them.
The horrific double murder comes as the state's youth gang crime problem escalates.
So, what do you think would lead a group of youths to carry out such a brutal attack? Was it a case of mistaken identity, gang rivalry, or something darker simmering beneath the surface of Melbourne's suburbs? Victoria is currently grappling with a sharp rise in crime, including violent and youth crime. In the year to June 2025, recorded crime climbed by about 15.7%, while offences committed by children and teens have hit highs not seen in decades. In today's video, we are about to peel back the cover and follow the trail from a chilling ambush to this wider issue of youth gang violence that has shaken Melbourne to its core. That night in Cobblebank wasn't just a tragic anomaly, it came against a backdrop of rising crime and unprecedented youth offending across Victoria. Police crime data shows that in the year to June 2025, the total number of criminal offences recorded in the state reached 638,640, the highest level in more than a decade. Meanwhile, Victoria's crime rate per 100,000 people climbed to 8,998.9, reflecting a broad surge in offences from thefts to violent attacks. But what has alarmed police and everyone else is not just the sheer number of crimes, but the involvement of young people in serious incidents. Yes, in that same period, more than 1,100 young offenders aged 10 to 17 were arrested over 7,000 times, which is up about 26.7% from the previous year, with Victoria Police also describing repeat youth offending as a major driver of the state's crime spike. Young people may make up only around 12.8% of all offenders, yet they account for a disproportionate share of violent crimes. Over 66% of robberies and nearly 48% of aggravated burglaries are linked to this age group. And that is exactly the reality into which 15-year-old Dao Akweng and 12-year-old Chol Achik walked on that September evening. A community already wrestling with fears about youth violence, blade crime, and gang-related clashes. Their deaths didn't happen in isolation. They took place amid record-high criminal activity, a surge that police, politicians, and everyday Victorians are still trying to understand and confront. Here, in this uneasy climate of escalating offences and intensifying public concern, let's begin to unravel exactly how that fatal ambush unfolded. They were just kids when the unthinkable happened. No crew, no criminal record, no gang ties, just two friends walking home after a night playing basketball. But on the 6th of September 2025, Dao Akweng and Chol Achik became the victims of one of the most senseless and devastating crimes Melbourne had seen. Dao wasn't just a teenager. Friends and coaches remembered him as a dedicated basketballer with real talent and big dreams, someone who trained relentlessly and hoped to one day play overseas or in Australia's top leagues. Those who knew him described his energy, leadership, and effortless smile. Chol's memory paints a different but equally poignant portrait, a warm-hearted, intelligent child whose smile lit up every room. At the funeral, his father, speaking at a vigil filled with hundreds of mourners, described him as a boy with a bright future and a loving spirit. The tragedy didn't just shock their families, it also rattled whole communities across Melbourne's west. Later, candlelit vigils drew crowds in Melton. Streets around Cobblebank were plastered with flowers and tributes. Strangers paused in silence to read heartfelt messages left at makeshift memorials. What made their deaths even harder to accept was how ordinary their lives were. They weren't gang members, they weren't troublemakers. They were boys with basketball jerseys and backpacks heading home after a game. And yet, in an instant, those lives were torn away on a quiet suburban street. An attack police described as having the hallmarks of youth gang crime, and something the state had been struggling to address long before that night. Their names now stand at the centre of a story about violence, fear, grief, and unanswered questions, reminding us that even in peaceful suburbs, the unthinkable can happen to those we least expect.
A 15-year-old have been killed in an ambush in Melbourne's west. The boys were on their way home from a basketball game when a gang of youths attacked them. Police are investigating whether it was a case of...
Within days of the 6th of September 2025 ambush that killed Dao Akweng and Chol Achik, detectives from the homicide squad, supported by specialised units, executed coordinated raids across Melbourne's outer suburbs. Initially, 7 people, aged between 15 and 19, were charged with the murders after police executed warrants at around a dozen properties early one morning. Those arrested included a 19-year-old man, 3 teenage boys, 15 and 16, and others aged 16 to 19, each facing murder charges. From the outset, police labelled the attack one of the worst knife crimes they had encountered, underscoring both its brutality and the broader implications for community safety. The investigation involved meticulous gathering of forensic evidence, witness statements, CCTV footage, and mobile data from the scene and surrounding streets. Detectives also increased patrols in Cobblebank and neighbouring suburbs while engaging with local schools and community leaders to rebuild public confidence and gather further intelligence. As the suspects were brought before Melbourne courts, the legal drama deepened.
The reason detectives want the boys' DNA was revealed today in court. They hope it matches evidence they've gathered from the crime scenes.
Throughout these proceedings, police stressed the strength of their evidence and the ongoing nature of the inquiry, signalling that each new court appearance peeled back further layers of what unfolded on that fateful September evening. No one in Melbourne wanted to believe it at first, that 2 kids walking home from basketball could be pulled into something far bigger than them. But as detectives dug deeper, a darker picture began to form. It wasn't clean, it wasn't simple, and it wasn't driven by just one motive. What police uncovered was a maze of possible triggers, each one more disturbing than the last. Prosecutors were the first to reveal the theory that made the most sense on paper. According to early court material, some of the accused were allegedly linked to simmering tensions following the December 2024 killing of Kon Shu Sain, a case that had already created friction between groups of teens in Melbourne's west. Investigators believed certain individuals were looking for payback, not against the boys specifically, but against any Sudanese youth who crossed their path that night. It was anger looking for a target, and Dao and Chol were simply in the wrong place at the worst possible moment. But then another theory surfaced, one so bizarre it almost sounded unreal. Detectives were told to examine whether a social media meme feud had played a role. A joke, a taunt, a digital insult passed around on TikTok and Instagram. Police didn't confirm it as a motive, but they did acknowledge that online back and forth between teen groups had escalated fights before, and they weren't ruling anything out. In a generation where grudges spread faster than wildfire through group chats, something tiny can snowball into something deadly. And still, investigators couldn't shake a third possibility: mistaken identity. Dao and Chol weren't part of any gang. They weren't involved in any disputes. They were just kids who loved basketball. So, is this an intentional strike? Or were these 2 boys misidentified in the chaos of a fast-moving conflict? Each theory made sense on its own. None of them fully explained the brutality. And that's what kept the community awake at night. The idea that the truth might involve pieces of every angle, stitched together into one terrible moment. But while detectives struggled to untangle motive, another question began rising from the shock and grief. Youth crime in Victoria isn't a one-off spike. It's a pattern that's been climbing for years, and it's part of what made the Cobblebank attack so jarring. Police and crime data show that incidents involving young offenders have reached levels not seen in over a decade, and they're a major factor in the state's broader crime picture. Victoria's Crime Statistics Agency reported a jump of 18.3% in total criminal incidents in the year to June 2025, the highest number of recorded offences in more than 20 years. But beneath that headline number lies a striking detail. Young people aged 10 to 17, though a small slice of the population, are heavily overrepresented in serious crime. In fact, repeat youth offenders account for a large share of violent incidents, pushing the state's youth crime rates to a 15-year high, According to local police and reporting, Victoria Police have publicly acknowledged that while the number of young offenders hasn't necessarily exploded, the number of times they're involved in alleged crimes has soared, pointing to a small group committing offences again and again. The types of incidents range from robberies and car theft to violent street clashes, and in many communities, the feeling of normalised danger has taken root. Add to this the fact that youths are often armed with knives, machetes, or other weapons. Concerns repeatedly raised by officers and commentators, and it's clear why Melbourne's suburbs are experiencing a persistent undercurrent of fear and tension. For people living in areas where youth violence is most visible, it's not just statistics anymore, it's daily life. And as the numbers continued to climb, questions emerged about where these patterns are most intense and why some neighbourhoods seem to bear the brunt of this wave of crime. And that leads us straight into our next chapter: how geography, group identity, and social dynamics combine to make certain areas hotspots for gang violence and rising tension on Melbourne's streets. Long before the killing of Dow and Chol in Cobblebank, Victoria was already struggling with a pattern of youth gang-linked violence becoming more visible in parts of Melbourne, particularly in the west and northwest. According to a coronial analysis and police reporting, around 350 youth gang members were identified operating in the northwest metropolitan region alone, a concentrated footprint that includes suburbs such as Melton, Wyndham and Brimbank. That region accounts for the largest proportion of youth gang-related violent offending in the state, with police categorising crimes such as aggravated burglary, robbery, use of weapons and serious assaults as part of that cohort's activity. Residents in these areas say they see a marked increase in street violence, from home invasions to brawls and armed confrontations, often in broad daylight and sometimes caught on mobile phones or CCTV. In 2025 alone, the city of Wyndham recorded over 1,100 alleged criminal incidents involving offenders aged 10 to 17, nearly double many neighbouring suburbs, and far exceeding the figures in second place Melton, with more than 500 such incidents. This stark contrast, essentially twice as many youth crime reports in Wyndham compared with nearby areas, underscores how deeply ingrained the issue has become in certain pockets. Victoria Police have responded with large-scale operations such as Operation Alliance, which has been running since 2020. Through coordinated raids, bail compliance checks and patrols, the task force has arrested hundreds of known youth gang members over multiple years, aiming to disrupt patterns before they escalate into more serious violence. In one 2024 blitz alone, police arrested 50 alleged offenders aged 10 to 24 and conducted checks on vehicles and bail breaches across Hobsons Bay, Wyndham and Brimbank. Despite this enforcement effort, youth gangs continue to influence crime patterns because, as community workers note, their presence registers not just in courtrooms but on the streets, in parks, shopping centres and transport hubs, a territory of tension where many parents now hesitate to let their teenagers walk alone after dark. Real stories from the streets. Behind all the numbers and police talk, there are real people living through this youth crime wave, and their stories paint a picture far more unsettling than any statistic could. In the Melton area of Melbourne's west, residents say they've seen violence escalate right in front of them. One woman told reporters how her family home was attacked multiple times, with groups of young people breaking through windows and doors in the early hours, forcing her and her children to flee for safety. She later left the area entirely, fearing that her kids could be targeted next. Families like hers are not alone. Another parent recalled finding a large group of teenagers hanging around just outside her house shortly after the Cobblebank killings. When she walked out to take out the rubbish, the teens scattered, but the fear stayed. Kids who were once carefree now stay home for weeks because the streets feel unsafe, even in broad daylight. It isn't just adults who feel it. Teenagers themselves talk about how normalised violence has become. In interviews, young people from these suburbs say they don't know if they can go out without being confronted, threatened, or worse. One 14-year-old told reporters that violence has gotten really bad and that you never know what might happen when you leave the house. Then there are the voices of young people who've been inside that world and walked out. Take the story of Ma Reek, who dreamed of being a professional basketballer but found himself drawn into gang life as a teen because of money, status, and the sense of belonging it offered. He explained that once you're in that culture, it's incredibly hard to escape, and even leaving doesn't mean the danger disappears. Experts say these testimonies reveal something deeper. For many young people, gang involvement isn't just about crime. It's about identity, fear, survival, and the search for respect in a world that feels stacked against them. And while these stories show how widespread the problem has become, they also raise another question, one that goes beyond fear and numbers and straight to how authorities are trying to respond. After the murders of Dow and Chall, Melbourne was left asking the same question, what now? The pressure on leaders was immediate. Within days, Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen faced calls to strengthen penalties for anyone who recruits children into gangs. In response, the government backed a proposal that would allow life sentences for adults who groom or recruit minors into organised crime, arguing that cutting off the pipeline is one of the only ways to slow the surge. Police supported the move, saying recruiters often target kids as young as 12 because they know they'll face lighter consequences. At the same time, Victoria Police expanded several long-running operations aimed at disrupting gang activity. One of the biggest is Operation Alliance, a statewide strategy originally created to target organised youth groups by tracking members, monitoring hotspots, and responding faster to retaliatory attacks. Police say that these coordinated efforts helped reduce some forms of violence in previous years, but the landscape has shifted. With youth crime at its highest rate in 15 years, officers admit the challenge is growing faster than they can contain it. Community groups are pushing a different angle, one that looks beyond arrests and punishments. Local youth workers argue that many teens caught up in these conflicts come from areas with limited access to sport programs, stable housing, or mentoring. In suburbs like Melbourne, where families have reported being too scared to go anywhere, workers say intervention must start early. They want the government to secure long-term funding for outreach programs, arguing that prevention is far cheaper and far safer than dealing with the aftermath of violent attacks. But even with all these strategies in motion, frustration remains. Residents say they still see large groups of teens roaming at night. Police say social media escalates conflicts faster than they can diffuse them, and parents worry that the next tragedy might already be forming in some group chat or street argument they'll never hear about until it's too late. In the end, what happened in Cobblebank wasn't just another crime statistic, it exposed a turning point. A moment where Melbourne had to confront the reality of youth violence spreading faster than anyone expected and costing lives far too young to be lost. So, what will it take to stop young people from being pulled into these dangerous groups? And do you think the new laws and tougher penalties will actually be enough to change anything at all? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story useful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll be back with more stories every week. Until then, stay safe, and thanks for watching.